The Urban Forester.
Life's an everyday adventure. That's my philosophy. Today, I was going on an adventure with my grandmother. I was so excited that I woke up early and was downstairs before everyone else, even the dog. My parents usually make breakfast for me, but I thought I would surprise them and make breakfast for them. I poured glasses of orange juice, toasted some bread, and set it all out on the table. Just as I opened the front door to get the newspaper, my grandmother arrived. We gave each other a huge hug, then walked into the kitchen together. I set another place for her just as my parents came down. We all had a great breakfast. We talked and laughed until it was time for my grandmother and me to hit the road. We hopped in the car and waved goodbye to my parents. My toes were tingling happily in my moccasins as we drove, but I still didn't know where we were going or what we were going to do. I decided to ask my grandmother for a clue.
A clue? When you look out the window, what do you see the most of?
My grandmother answered with a question. I looked and noticed the sky seemed to be everywhere. The sky, I replied.
Very good, Molly dear. Now what do you see the most of if you look lower?
She asked. Trees, I exclaimed.
Excellent, Molly. Today is all about trees,
my grandmother said with joy in her voice. She then told me that we were heading into the city to meet someone special and to do something special. We arrived at a cafe, and as we entered, I saw an extremely tall woman look our way.
Hello, Mrs. Short. This is my granddaughter, Molly,
my grandmother said to the woman. I was thinking how funny her name was when she looked down and spoke to me.
Hello, Molly. It's lovely to meet you. Your grandmother told me that you love nature almost as much as she does.
I smiled as we sat down to eat. Then my grandmother told me something interesting. She said that Mrs. Short was the urban forester for the city. Wow, what's that? I asked. Mrs. Short told me that an urban forester cares for city trees and is in charge of planting, watering, and keeping them healthy. That sounds like a big job. How many trees are there in the urban forest? I asked in awe.
Well, every city is different, but our city has over 250,000 trees,
she answered. I looked out the window and began to count the trees I could see. So those 5 trees are your trees? I asked as I pointed to the trees. She explained that none of them are actually hers. They belong to everyone, but she loves them as if they were her own. We chatted more about trees as we finished our lunch. Then Mrs. Short said she had some things to show us, so we popped up and went for a walk. We looked at all the trees as we strolled up and down the shaded sidewalks. I asked Mrs. Short how she decided what kind of trees to plant and where to place them. She said it's a big decision each time they plan to plant a tree.
First, you have to think about what trees will grow well in a given area, depending on how much sun, wind, and water there will be. Then you have to consider how much space the tree will need for its roots and leaves, which is called its canopy.
We stopped and looked at a tree.
This tree was planted before the traffic signal was put in, so they have to cut back its branches every year so it doesn't block the driver's view of the traffic lights.
Amazing! I never thought about trees needing space to grow. Why do we plant trees in the city if there isn't enough room for them? I asked, confused. Mrs. Short explained that trees are more than just pretty to look at. We also need them.
Trees do very important things. They provide the oxygen that we need to breathe. They clean pollution from the air by storing carbon dioxide in their wood, and they drink the storm water, which helps keep the city from flooding.
I didn't understand all of her science words, but I did understand now that trees have jobs. Before today, I had just thought they were, well, trees. We stopped at another tree that didn't look very good.
Mrs. Short hopped onto the tree and climbed way up high into the branches. When she came down, she said that the tree was very sick and they would have to remove it. It seemed so sad, but she said they would plant another tree right away. "What is your favorite tree?" I asked excitedly. She told me she couldn't possibly choose just one, as she loved them all. We were now at the edge of a park, and I saw a sign that said, "Tree Dedication Day." My grandmother and Mrs. Short handed me a little tree sapling in a pot and invited me to plant it in the park. They told me it was an oak tree and it would live for a very long time. I proudly carried the tree into the park, and with the help of Mrs. Short and my grandmother, I planted it. Just next to it, my grandmother placed a sign that said, "For Molly Moccasins." We got a glass of lemonade and some cookies at the Tree Dedication Day celebration, then went back to visit my baby tree. I was so happy to have a tree, and I promised to share it with my children, my grandchildren, and even my great-grandchildren. I will teach them to hug it and to say thank you for all its work, I said as my grandmother and I both smiled. I have always loved trees, but I didn't know how much we needed trees until I met the urban forester. Molly Moccasins, everyday adventurer.